Hello, and welcome to Workplace Stories, the podcast where human capital experts share their real-world experiences and insights. Hosted by Red Thread Research, Workplace Stories surfaces the latest industry trends, innovative talent strategies, and best practices for success. Tune in for practical advice on how to best transform your workplace.
Welcome to Workplace Stories. I'm Danny Johnson.
And I'm Stacia Gar.
And today we had the opportunity to talk to J.D. Dillon, who's the author of a new book coming out in May called The Frontline Enablement Playbook. We walked through some of his personal experiences on the front line and some of the ways that he's thinking about it. Stacia, what stood out to you?
Well, we got quite a bit of time to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is managers. He had this point where he talked about how managers are structurally trapped. What he meant by that when we dug into it was that they are being told to hit goals and to do things, but then not given the resources or decision-making power to do anything about that. And part of the reason that I thought that was interesting was, one, it aligns with the manager research that we did a few years ago that looked at how organizations were supporting managers and how that declined and how basically everything was being pushed through managers. But what was an interesting distinction that I hadn't thought about was that when we're talking about that from a corporate workforce perspective, you can literally see typically those people, or at least you interact with them regularly, who may be having this problem with their managers or they themselves are having problems. And so I think his point was that there's more of an opportunity to fix that structural trap versus somebody who's out there and who corporate doesn't get to see, and for whom they may have just less power. That manager may have less power to make changes and less visibility to corporate to make those changes. That similarity yet distinction really jumped out at me. A second thing he talked about was when we asked, well, how do you help managers? And we had a joke about, you need to throw leadership development out. We'll let you listen to that. But his big point was around, instead, what you need to do is enable connection, particularly between frontline managers in different locations. And it's really about that connection over content, learning content. That's how you enable the learning for those folks. And then another thing that tied back into the research that we had done was we did a study and we talked about othering the frontline and don't other them. So don't make them so completely different. And he made that point, not with those words, but basically. But then he said, it's not enough just not to other them, but you actually have to fundamentally understand their experience, because their experience is different. But that doesn't make it any less, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't understand it. And certainly if you're in corporate and you have more kind of like leverage and control and power and, opportunity and influence, you should be understanding that deeply before you go off and making a whole bunch of recommendations.
Yeah, those things stood out to me too, especially that last point. He talked a lot about not giving frontline managers more to do. Sure, people need training, but providing them with a binder of things that they need to go through doesn't help them, especially in their particular context, which I thought was really interesting. The other thing that I want to point out before we let you all loose on listening it is he outlines hierarchy of needs for frontline workers, which goes from your livelihood at the bottom. And he mentions, people have jobs because they need money, and that's why you do it. So livelihood on the bottom, then stability, the ability to understand your schedule and make changes to it as necessary, and then community, and then culture. And he says that a lot of organizations dip into the culture side or try to change the culture without nurturing those other things and making sure that those other things are in place in order for them to do it.
I think he added also there something about purpose too, which is interesting because that can tie into culture and the like. And that's where a lot of corporate folks often focus, but he put that kind of at the very top of that, the hierarchy, starting from the bottom up to the top. I'm seeing the triangle in my brain. But the other thing that jumped out at me too, and we mentioned this podcast, is in many ways that actually mimics our own worker experience framework, which is different than what we tend to see in terms of how people think about worker experience. But it starts with, essential support, the basics. So it was really interesting to hear how he described that in a frontline context.
Yeah, he's super fun to listen to. So we encourage you to listen to the entire podcast. We will put where you can get his book in the meeting notes. Listen, if you like us, follow us, recommend us to your friends. We'll see you next time. JD, welcome.
I am having a good time. How are you?
Welcome. We're glad you're here. Goodness, this is going to be a long recording.
Some would say I talk about nothing else, but my bio says I'm the world's foremost expert in frontline learning and performance, and I justify that statement by saying, show me the other guy.
If there is one. Yes, that's a good point. Well, I'm super interested to talk to you because, as you know, 80% of the workers out there are frontline, and most organizations aren't necessarily paying attention to how we enable them. So we have a bunch of questions based loosely on your book, and hopefully we can walk through and maybe have an intelligent conversation about them. Does that sound good?
I'll do what I can.
Okay, wonderful. Well, maybe we start with like the first date get to know you question, which is tell me a little bit about yourself.
I spent my entire career thinking and talking about and supporting frontline workers. I think it's just at this point, I'm looking for ways to help advocate for and elevate the conversation beyond my day-to-day work or beyond the organizations that I work with and or for. And in the book that I released in May, the book comes out on May 5th, you're going to read not just 220 plus field tested practices about enabling frontline workers and stories from 50 plus contributors from around the world. You're going to read my story too, because the book literally begins with me standing outside on the curb at the local mall, just figuring out if I'm going to go in for my first shift at my first job. And then I take you on the journey of what I learned being a frontline employee and a frontline manager and an L&D professional and technologist who supports frontline workers. And then what I was able to learn from all of the different people I got to talk to over the past 2 years while writing the book, because 50 people contributed to the book, but I spoke to hundreds more individuals, some who weren't allowed to contribute to the book because they work for large companies that have very large legal teams, and some who were just having a side conversation that shared a bit of perspective on their experience being or supporting frontline teams. I've been saying this a lot lately as the book gets ready for release, but writing a book is really this interesting self-reflective exercise because I wrote most of the book sitting in frontline spaces. Originally, I thought that was a gimmick. It was going to be a fun thing to say. I wrote the book on the front line too. But in doing so, it forced me down this path of thinking differently about my own experiences to the point where I'd be writing a particular chapter, and then something about the environment that I was in triggered a memory that I just hadn't recalled for a long time, or helped me connect the dots between what happened and what should have happened, or how that happened, or what I learned from that experience. So it was this really interesting opportunity to think back and look at my own personal and professional experience differently, and then try to translate that into a story that hopefully help other people do their best work every shift.
I like that. Also, I was glancing through your book this morning, and there are pictures of a young JD standing on.
Oh, there are.
Yeah. It's quite amazing. So buy it just for that.
So JD, tell us the title again so everybody can hear it.
The Frontline Enablement Playbook.
Frontline Enablement Playbook. Okay. Equip your deskless workforce to
power organizational performance.
All right. Perfect. Okay. So you said that this is the first time that a playbook has been ever written for this group. Now, if that's true, it probably is. Why do you think that's the case? What does it say about this space that Frontline occupies?
If that's your real name.
If that's your real name, JD Dillon.
One, it's hard. At no point in this story or any point in my career would I sit back and say, you know, it's really easy to do. Take a team of 20 people and figure out how to help 800,000 other people do their jobs effectively around the world. It's a difficult challenge. And when you take it from the perspective of learning and development or HR, or corporate communications, or whatever enablement function you work in or you want to focus on, it's really hard to wrap your arms around the challenges and opportunities facing this part of the workforce as compared to your corporate team, who you can physically see in a lot of cases. You're in the building with these individuals. But there are also benefits too, and reasons why I think the frontline workforce is the most dynamic and interesting and exciting part of not just the workforce, but the enablement story. Because it is difficult, but it also comes with some advantages. When you support a corporate team, you might, let's just say you have 500 corporate team members. They probably do 473 different jobs because they're all specialists in their particular function, their particular job. You hired them in because of what they could do. You didn't necessarily hire them in to teach them to do that job. Flip to the front line. Let's say you have 10,000 frontline employees. They probably do 7 jobs. A lot of people doing the same type of work, but they came in a lot of cases with little to no experience. Some people might be 30-year industry veterans that are joining your team. Some people worked for your company 7 times before. But a lot of people have never done this. A lot of people have never worked, period. So it's a different set of challenges and different environment. And I also think there's that general reality that I think it's not just organizations, it's people at large. It's society doesn't heavily value frontline workers. So it's not just executives. It's not just the workplace. It's everybody. There's a reason why I refer to the frontline workforce often as the invisible workforce. We see the work, but we don't often consider the people or think about the people that are executing those jobs, that are back of house, making your food when you visit a restaurant, or the housekeeper that you don't see but cleaned your room for you before you came back for it on vacation. So we just collectively don't consider these folks. I think there's a lot of legacy assumptions about this being introductory work or low-skilled jobs, those types of factors. Anyone who's ever referred to a frontline worker as a low-skilled job, I would love to see that individual go work at a restaurant for a 12-hour shift and figure that out. Good luck for you, sir. That there's just all of these conceptions about what this job is. And I think a lot of it is coming from people who have never done and have definitely never supported the work. And as a result, we've ended up in this place where we have deprioritized investment in the people who are responsible for executing our corporate strategies because it's a large audience, it's expensive, it's difficult, but we can do better.
But I have a question there, because there's inherent in what you just said an assumption that these are all customer-facing individuals who are probably, like you said, doing 7 tasks instead of 400. When we did our frontline research, there's a lot of different type of frontline workers. Like a doctor is a frontline worker, a nurse is a frontline worker, all sorts of people. So they're not all people who at the very beginning of their careers or without necessarily education or training. Or I think, also could be folks who are on the front line on a manufacturing line. There is a high degree of variability. And so when we broadly say that we're not enabling them, I mean, there's a lot of enablement and a lot of training that goes into manufacturers and certainly doctors and nurses and the like. So there's also that element of variability in what we mean when we're talking about frontline as well.
It's important to acknowledge the frontline is not one thing. I do think a lot of people, when I ask people sometimes in sessions to close your eyes, picture a frontline worker, who do you see? And I think a lot of people are picturing a younger person who has limited experience and not fast forwarding to the reality that a lot of manufacturing employees are engineers, not people who are connecting widgets on a line somewhere. They're highly skilled individuals. But if you look across the frontline workforce, even within the reality that there's so many different types of jobs and types of environments that fit under this frontline umbrella, there's still a set of attributes that I think a lot of, if not most of these folks share in terms of how that job is done, how the work is prioritized, and how they're perceived. Because if you take a highly skilled, highly educated nurse or healthcare professional, also being heavily devalued, also not properly appreciated, also abused by their customer base. So there's a lot of similarities in the attributes of how the work is done and that work experience that allows us to be able to have a collective conversation about the frontline workforce. But then once you start to dig in and talk about what does it take to effectively enable these teams, I use telecommunications as an example. In one business, you have field technicians who are out in your house installing cable. You have contact center agents who are the people who are on the phone when you're not happy with your cable service. And then there are retail associates who are trying to upsell you additional cable services when you visit their retail store. So even in one business, you have very different people in different environments doing different types of work, but they still share commonalities that we help us address them from an enablement strategy perspective.
If I think back to like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and we think about frontline workers there, often certainly when I was starting my working, I'm not going to call it career, but working, there was this sense that you could get in literally like at the front line and work your way up. And over time, I think we've had two things happen. One is those career paths in many frontline organizations have stopped. There's a ceiling, and you can't then go into corporate and, have started making fries and end up the CEO of McDonald's, as an example. But I don't know that the people who went through those lines went through those career paths 30 years ago, right? Like that's my point. So that's thing one. And then thing two is I think about that same time period, there has been a dramatic push on people who now today occupy those corporate white collar jobs. Many of them did not have that experience of working in the front line because it was go to college, get a job, spend your time and energy there and then get a good job right out of it. And I think maybe they skip some of that. So there's that less empathy with that experience. Those are just my two observations. Do you think that might have something to do with why we may not be focused on this group's enablement?
There's a yes and in there, because I think you also have to consider folks who did come out of frontline experiences, right? Did start as a retail associate and worked their way through, and maybe they're now division manager, or maybe they're now an executive at the corporate office. But if you ascended to those ranks, you probably had a pretty positive experience. You might have tripped over the right versions of this, or you came up at a time when the work was valued differently and opportunities look different. So I think it's a collective challenge of people who don't understand the day-to-day experience. Some people assume that the plan happens in frontline work. I was having a conversation with a gentleman who previously supported a large food service organization. Can I be more vague? And I asked him, okay, there's a process for preparing this food item. Does everyone in corporate 100% believe that this process is followed to the letter in every restaurant? And he said, oh yeah, absolutely. Well, there you go. So there's disconnect between what people think is supposed to happen and what actually happens. And then there's a disconnect in the experience that an individual had and assuming that that's the experience that everyone else is having, or everyone else has an opportunity to have. I always talk about the fact that frontline work is a difficult math problem, because when you look at job postings for frontline positions, again, across industries, they often emphasize things like opportunity here. You can grow here. You can build a career here. And I sit back and say, most will not. One, a lot of people don't want to, and that's perfectly fine, because a lot of people have this job because they need this job because they need a paycheck to take care of somebody. That's perfectly fine. But let's say everyone in your restaurant chain wanted to ascend into corporate. That math doesn't math. Those opportunities aren't there. So the people who do move and kind of find that talent mobility opportunity inside have a certain version of the frontline experience that can't be replicated for everyone. So we can't look at things and make decisions through that lens. So I'm 100% with you in terms of the reality. I also think the realities are different based on the type of business and size and scale of business. If we're talking about a grocery operation with 1 million employees, and we're talking about a regional grocer that has 1,500 employees, opportunity looks very different, because you might be able to ascend inside of that business because a lot of those businesses are still local, family owned. It's just a different reality versus trying to become the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar establishment. That's a hired professional from the finance industry usually, right? So it kind of echoes that sentiment that the work is different, the environment is different, the opportunity is different. The day-to-day realities of the job still echo consistently, and I think that allows us opportunity to have conversations and swap ideas about how we can help people have a better chance to do a good job.
So I'm going to do like a throwaway question, but in your book, you allude to the fact, or maybe you just outright say it, we're trying to solve this problem with training.
We should never, but in a lot of cases,
I said, but we are, right? Like that's how we're currently doing it.
I think I would say more often, I think when it comes to frontline performance, we're trying to solve the problem with managers. I think there are more instances where corporate defaults to make the managers do it or have the managers make them do it. And then the training team gets involved in certain cases. And then we get into the kind of very familiar train it out of people, which also doesn't work. But inside this book, because it's about 170,000 words and 650 pages, it's a long book. There's a book about frontline managers inside this book about frontline enablement. So there's an entire part dedicated to the managers, because if we don't get that right, nothing else works. The frontline employees don't have the experience that we intend them to have and can't perform at the level we need them to drive outcomes. And corporate teams don't get their strategies executed because the manager is both the connection point between corporate strategy and frontline execution and the single point of failure in a lot of cases.
So just dream with me here for a second. Does it have to be that way? I mean, that's the system that currently exists. Does it have to be that way? Could we enable people without the managers?
I don't think we can enable people without the managers. I think we can enable people differently so as to not over rely on and burn the managers out. Because right now, I always make the reference to the fact that so many emails end, if you have any questions, ask your manager, like that general perspective on things. Meanwhile, managers are just burned. Whenever I talk to anyone who's responsible for enabling frontline managers in different types of organizations and I ask, how's it going? I hear the words, they're broken, an awkward amount of time, an unfortunate amount of times. I think it's harder to be a frontline manager today than it was a couple of years ago during a particularly disruptive time. I think right now it's a decision. Then it was circumstance. But if you look at what's happened to labor hours inside of frontline operations, you just have to visit any frontline operation. You can see it. The number of employees that were standing inside of that establishment in 2018, 2019 versus the number who are standing there right now. The number of tasks hasn't necessarily declined. We haven't automated the job to the point where this is the outcome associated to it. Different decisions are being made, and a lot of it's piling on top of the manager. And one of the contributors to the book talks about the reality of the working manager, because a lot of those managers are built into the workload. So they're expected to spend 80% of their time doing the job of a frontline worker and then figure out in the other 20% how to do all of the things that are required of them as a functional manager too. That's just hard. So the way I suggest it is that we need to look at the manager job, figure out how do we lighten the load? How do we definitely not add to it? How do we help managers be able to focus on the right things by taking away some of the things we pile on top of them, like having to convey every message to frontline team members, having to coach in every particular situation, having to be relied on for everything that happens inside of those locations, but not mitigate their importance, not take away the relationship to the frontline team member. Because I like to remind organizations, frontline employees don't work for your company. They work for that manager, because that manager knows their name and knows their kids' names and hired them and promoted them and pays them and all of those different factors. So that relationship's essential to the entire experience of frontline work. Right now, managers aren't able to focus on the right things. And then we end up in these situations where people have bad managers. I think in more cases than not, they have managers who are underperforming because they were set up to fail.
So we saw the same thing in our research on managers over the last 4 years.
Because you do good research.
Well, why, thank you. But similar for frontline versus non-frontline, we looked at this, and this is one of the areas where there was similarity. And so what we found that was really interesting was that coming out of, or during the pandemic, you just referred to that being, actual circumstance versus choice, the amount of support that organizations actually gave to managers was a lot more than it had been because, everything that associated with the pandemic. And as you said, so much of the communication went through managers and they needed to know what to communicate, et cetera, et cetera. But then coming out of it, starting in about the latter half of 2022, we started to see those supports slowly get pulled back from managers. And what was interesting was that we could literally see in the data, there was about a year, the year being 2023, where managers were still doing the work. Even though they didn't have the organizational support, they were still kind of holding up from the perspective of the people who reported into them. They still said, my manager does these things and supports this, et cetera. But then come 2024, managers gave up. They're just like, the org's not supporting me. I can't do everything that's on me because we didn't take anything off or took very little off. I'm still supposed to be confidant and coach and assessor and still do my real job, et cetera, which is not managing, even though I have the manager title. This is going somewhere, I promise. So we see the similarity, but fundamentally what is happening is there is an economic incentive to push things through the manager versus to take things away and design systems and structures around the manager to lighten the load so that they can be more effective managers. We have been saying for decades, to your point, people leave managers, not organizations, et cetera. But when does this break enough, or what does it take to actually make this investment in these systems so that managers can manage? Or are we just kind of all spitting into the wind?
When you lose enough money. There are some organizations right now who are making that investment. You see some store managers in certain retail establishments getting paid very large sums and very large bonuses because they are very hard to replace. I think the pressure test that a lot of organizations have put.
But that's still paying those people. That's not the system around them though, right?
There are some others who, as an example, are adding labor hours into the frontline operation to remove the manager from having to step in all the time. So they can now focus on running a business as opposed to having to run fire drills every day. Bits and pieces. Is anyone wholesale changing the job and completely changing the systems of work around frontline establishments so that people can play the right roles in a new version of the system? No, I don't think anyone is really meaningfully there yet. But there are pieces and parts of improvements happening because I think organizations are starting to see the cracks because of what has happened during that period of time that you talked about. They figured out how far they can push, similar to customer experiences, right? Take self-checkout as the grand experiment. There was this assumption during the pandemic that, oh, we're all self-checkout all day. And then two things happen. One, customers push back and say, I don't work here. Two, a lot of people steal things. So a lot of money walks out the front door, and suddenly it's like, oh, okay, so we're not going all the way back, or we're not putting all the cash registers and all the cashiers back. We're going to do more and put in other systems and other layers to try to make a better balance work. Similar idea happening to the human side of the workplace, but it takes bending and bending and bending to the point where things start to break, and then small improvements and investments follow up behind it, unless you have an organization that has a level of empowered stakeholder and decision maker who has an investment in the human side of the experience that changes things, which is more likely to happen in a small, local business than it's likely to happen in a large global organization. And like these stick, right? It might happen for a little while in larger organizations, but it sticks when, the owner operator is a family who's owned this business for the last 5 generations. That's a very different story.
So what you're saying is we shall be supporting small business.
I think we forget that a significant percentage of the frontline workforce works in small and medium businesses, because we tend to talk about or see the large employers that have tens to hundreds of thousands of employees, which is why I love using examples from grocery, because one, everyone's been to a grocery store. Not everyone's been on a construction site, so it relates to a lot of people. And two, a lot of grocery is still regional business. A lot of it is still family-owned business. So I think it's an interesting example where you have your larger businesses and you have your smaller regional businesses. What do they have in common, and what's different? What can we learn from one another?
So can we talk a little bit about your hierarchy of needs for frontline workers? Can you explain to us what that is?
So when it comes down to figuring out what do frontline employees need to be successful, it's one of my favorite questions to ask people when I visit frontline locations is, what would help you do your job better? What would make this job better? Very rarely do I hear the words back, training. I hear a lot of other things come back about the experience of work. And it echoes my own experience especially when I was a frontline manager in movie theaters and theme parks. I didn't have a lot of training conversations with my team members. I had a lot of other conversations about the employee experience. So a couple of years ago, my team simply went out and surveyed a large group of frontline employees and just asked that question, right? What do you need? What are you looking for in a job to help you do this job well, to be successful, and to stay in this job? And we use the data to craft what I present in the book as the hierarchy of needs, which the point of presenting it early in the story is to help put a lens on the frontline narrative to say it's not about one thing. It's about a combination of different factors that even if you don't have direct influence over, you have to keep in mind, because it is impacting someone's perspective on the job and their ability to perform or their motivation to perform. So the 4 layers, simply stated, the foundational layer is livelihood, because that's why people have jobs. So even if you can't control how much people are paid, you have to take that into account, what the pay situation, the benefit situation is, and the motivation people have to be in this job and to show up every day. Next layer up is stability. So that includes everything from having the training and support to do the job effectively to having a predictable and reliable schedule. Because if I don't know when my hours take place, it's hard for me not just to manage my life, but to manage the reality that I probably have multiple jobs in a lot of cases. So how do I make this work? The next layer up is community, which speaks to that idea that I'm not working in service of the company and KPIs in which I don't share in the celebration of us achieving. I'm working for the success of the people that I know and the connection that we have in our day-to-day. And that's one of the things that I do see more organizations emphasizing, especially when it comes to the quick quit problem, because that's, again, everyone has turnover challenges in different ways in different industries and different roles. But rarely in corporate environments does your turnover situation take place within the first several hours on the job, where you hire a couple of people and several of them don't make it through the first day because they make decisions because they can walk down the street because the other option is right there. So I've worked with several organizations that have realized, well, if we bury someone in a back room for 6 hours of e-learning on the first day and they get up and leave, can you blame them? What if we spent more of that initial time? You have to do the compliance stuff, but what if more of that time was spent with people, getting to know one another, talking with one another? Some of the most successful frontline operations, the types of businesses where you sit back and go, why are they so much better than the other guy? And you dig in, you start to find out that they have interesting hiring tactics, like they hire groups of friends. So the people who come in already like each other and already motivated to not mess with one another, and then they benefit from that as a business. So that idea of community and the power that plays when it comes to enabling the experience. And then at the top is culture, that connection to the larger mission, vision, values of the business. So we break apart what those different layers mean and kind of keep coming back to it throughout the story in terms of how it influences strategy decisions around enablement of frontline teams.
Interesting. As you're talking through that, I was thinking back to our worker experience framework, and it actually maps really closely to what you were saying. So we're in the process of updating that. But for listeners, maybe if you do pick up JD's book, have a look at that updated worker experience framework when it comes out. I wanted to talk a little bit about tensions. Tensions is one of Danny and my favorite topics right now because we're going to be anchoring some of our summit conversations on this idea of tensions. And you introduced this idea in the book. And you say that tensions can't be fixed, but they can be navigated. So can you talk to us about what you mean by that and how you would design inside those types of constraints?
I think in the book, I have a snarky conversation with myself at one point where it's a manager talking to corporate, and corporate says you have to hit these goals. And then the manager starts saying, well, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I do this? And they keep saying no, like you have to. And is anyone watching The Pit?
I am not, but I'm hearing all about it.
One, it's great. Two, it very much is meaningfully reflecting the reality of a very specific and very challenged part of the frontline workforce. And there's a conversation that happens between Dr. Robbie and the administrator of the hospital. And the administrator of the hospital is like, your patient satisfaction scores are the lowest in the area. His reply is, you should hire more nurses so people don't have to sit out in the waiting room for 12 and a half hours. And her reply is, well, other people are figuring it out. I don't work in healthcare, but I'm hearing my past echo in my head because so much of it is figure it out. I don't have the resource to. Everyone complains about the restrooms. Can I have budget to remodel the restrooms? No. What am I doing here? So there's a lot of those kind of push and pull realities of frontline work where you're giving me more tasks to do. Can I have more labor hours? No, you can't. Especially when it comes to the experience of the manager, but it informs the entire experience. I think the challenge is that we often just push back on it versus trying to figure out, well, how do we justify our way out of it? As an L&D professional, one of the ways I often thought about my job is I have to execute in such a way that justifies my paycheck. So how do I think about my decisions differently through the lens of building the business case for improvement as opposed to saying it's the right thing to do? And I remind people of that over and over in the book is that while it is 100% the right thing to do to provide people with the tools and support they need to feel good about their job and to do their job as best they can, organizations don't make decisions about what's best for people. It's just reality. So this is not an altruistic pursuit. To do right by the frontline, we have to do right by the business. And that's kind of the tension that I try to help organizations overcome is that I think oftentimes we think it's one or the other. And I do think, and I have seen, and I've experienced as an employee and as an L&D professional and a technologist, you can do both. You just usually can't come from the top down and it be a grand strategy idea. It's more about really digging into the work experience and finding those small but meaningful shifts that we can make, which is why the tagline for the book is every shift counts. Small shifts matter, and every shift is an opportunity for someone to do something great on the front line.
If you're a senior people leader, you know the hard part isn't finding ideas. It's deciding which ones are worth acting on. That's why Red Thread created Summit 2026. It's not a conference, it's a small, invitation-only working retreat. On June 23rd, senior HR leaders will gather in Snowbird, Utah for 3 days of guided, peer-driven work grounded in research. No keynotes, no vendor pitches, no passive audiences. Leaders will leave having strengthened people strategies they've been grappling with for years, with clearer direction on what to change, what to stop, and what to double down on. If you want to be part of that conversation, learn more and request an invitation over at redthreadresearch.com.
I remember when we were doing our frontline performance study as well as some of the other studies that we've done, it's just harder on the front line because people, a lot of times corporate will see frontline as more quantifiable. Like it's widgets and there are clearer goals in a lot of cases and there are clearer measures than you would often have in an office job. I'm wondering, first of all, is that fair to say? And secondly, how do you overcome that? Because it feels like if I'm in an office and the bathrooms are terrible and somebody surfaces that, those bathrooms are going to get changed. You know what I mean? Whereas on the front line, it seems like it's harder to get things like that pushed through.
First of all, you would think that corporate bathrooms would be more effectively maintained than they are. If you want to understand, if you're interviewing an establishment, you want to understand the culture of that establishment, asked to visit one of the restrooms that is used by the employees every day, and it tells you everything you need to know about the culture of an organization. Can you tell that I used to be a custodial manager for an extended period of time? Do you want to know which stall is most used and least used?
Yes.
The least used, I'm not guaranteeing anything here, but statistically, and I can back this up with personal experience as a custodial person, the least used stall is the first one, because people assume that people use the first one and never use it. So they bypass that. So the one that is most likely to be clean is the first stall in the restroom that you pass by. You're welcome, world.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it is much easier to have the perspective, and I think a lot of organizations have the perspective that I can manage my frontline by spreadsheet. You have a lot of people who maybe regional managers, they don't visit their locations, they just watch a set of cameras on their phone. And that's how they get an understanding of what's taking place inside the operation. They can't hear what's happening. They definitely don't see everything, but they're just making assumptions about these different signals that they pick up. Meanwhile, it's the store manager, the location manager, and the people inside the location that know what actually happened to influence that number. And I can attest to this experience myself. When I was a frontline manager, I made decisions based on two factors, and neither of those two factors was my team members, unfortunately. I made decisions based on, one, what would get me a phone call the next day. So I was going to avoid that phone call. And then two, how I was bonused. So whatever metrics were driven in those areas, that's where my team leaned, because that's how the job was shaped. I eventually figured out there's a different way to work as a frontline manager to find that balancing act. But there's a benefit and a detriment to the fact that frontline work is infinitely more measurable. My challenge is, can we actually take advantage of it from both sides? Okay, so if people can make assumptions about frontline work based on what they see on a spreadsheet, can we also take advantage of the fact that frontline work is infinitely measurable to make sure that our solutions and the things that we're doing to try to help have an impact? Because corporate work, incredibly difficult to connect the dots between anything that you do and an outcome, given that 475 different jobs being done by 500 people. But on the front line, things are so measured. I came out of contact centers at one point. Literally everything is measured inside of a contact center. That put the responsibility on me to connect the dots between the things I was doing to try to help people and metrics that the business cared about, and then using that as a justification for doing more of the types of things that I could do to help people. So I think there is a way to flip that challenge on its head, but we have to go into the conversation about enabling people, again, not thinking about employee experience, thinking about driving business outcomes to justify the improvement of said employee experience.
We know that improved employee experience and engagement leads to better business outcomes.
We think we do, but we have a big number problem as a human species, right? Where we say lack of I'm making up this number. I have a slide with the real number on it somewhere, but poor employee engagement costs the workplace $1.7 trillion every year. And you look at it and go, oh my gosh, and then you do nothing about it.
But that's not the stat I'm looking at. I'm thinking of but it's not about like the cost of whatever. It's like, we know, and I'm thinking about research that was published back in 2005, dating myself in this field.
Isn't it sad that 2005 is dating?
It is. Yeah. I mean, it was just yesterday, right? Anyway, but when the first quantitative survey said that you can, and I was at corporate executive board at the time, and we looked at engagement, and it was, divided between discretionary effort and intent to stay, and that with higher engagement, you could increase discretionary effort, which was shown to improve certain business outcomes, and intent to stay was shown to improve or lower our recruiting costs. And we've been building on that work ever since as a field. And so the idea that, I don't know, I just feel like the logic is a little backwards in how you mentioned it.
I don't think you can justify business decisions with employee experience metrics.
I don't think you can either, but I think it happens quite a bit on the corporate side, and it doesn't happen a whole bunch on the frontline side. It seems like it's easier. It seems like there's more credibility when a manager walks up to another manager and where everyone has a desk and says, we need to fix this. We're losing people. We got to fix this. Whereas on the front line, that's not the same.
You can have the conversation. We're all right here. It's a lot easier to dive in from that perspective. You're staring at it and you can start to make assumptions because it is your experience too. They're so close that they're feeling whatever that point of friction. The lunch downstairs is horrible. People are leaving. You're experiencing it. I'm mocking, but it's true. Meanwhile, it's just, I don't believe anyone from a corporate office has ever seen their frontline operation. Ever.
I don't think that's true. We talked to
No one from corporate has ever seen the operation. The reason being is because we know you're coming.
Maybe.
No, when I managed movie theaters, no one from corporate ever saw my actual movie theater because the guys down the street at the other location knew to call me when they showed up. And when that happened, I started making changes to the operation to show them what they needed to see. I'm speaking a bit grand in saying they've never seen it. I know several executives who have done secret shopping with their kids, like send their kids in to their locations and tell me what happened. That's hard to know it's coming, but it's just kind of a metaphorical way to say they don't see. In some cases, it's because the process is actually different. If you've ever worked with a large distributed frontline organization and you visit their locations that are close to their headquarters versus the locations that are in places that the corporate team is rarely to go, you physically see the difference in that experience that people have at work because of the experience that corporate has or how they prioritize different things. So there's just a disconnect. And we often talk about the fact that, we talk about feedback and the employee engagement survey is ridiculous. And the fact that you try to collect feedback once a year and make that meaningful and nothing ever meaningfully happens and employees get disengaged as a result from the engagement survey. All of that is true. And I think organizations have continued to struggle to make the conversation about frontline work two-way in a meaningful fashion, to actually collect feedback from the front line, to not make it a bubble up process, tell your manager who tells their regional manager who never tells anybody at corporate because they have to be admitting that something is wrong inside of their part of the business, which they're unlikely to do because of politics. So I think we still haven't figured it out. There's more tools available. You can try to pull off things like pulse surveys. AI helps us parse information and data more effectively. I think we're still early in that conversation to figure out, well, how do we use these tools in a way that helps us actually understand and figure out where can we make small but meaningful shifts that are going to have the impact we need on both sides of the equation, right? Help employees feel better about the work and have a better experience and drive outcomes that justify the additional investment in the organization to the right degree.
And on that, we're going to go to lightning round. These are questions that we ask just so people can get to know you a little bit better, JD, if they don't already.
I'm highly Googleable.
Are you bragging? First question. What movie has the best soundtrack?
American Pie 2.
Okay. What's on that soundtrack?
It's less about the fact that Sum 41 is on the soundtrack. It's more about the fact that it just sounds like my life at that time. Right? So there are no songs on the soundtrack that make me go, I'm listening to that again. It's also a very difficult soundtrack to purchase. Something about the licensing and rights to that music made it very difficult to buy on CD or any format, I think, ever at this point. But it's just that one movie soundtrack that if I hear those songs playing, I am physically in a place at a time, because something about like late 90s, early 2000s music captures me in that way.
I totally hear you, because I get the same sort of reaction with the Grosse Pointe Blank soundtrack. Every time I hear that, it takes me right back to being there. I love it. And it is also very hard to find.
This is on the American Pie 1 soundtrack. We're having an awkwardly deep conversation about American Pie. If I hear the song You Wanted More by Tonic, I am immediately cleaning a movie theater. Like, that's what happens in my head, because American Pie came out the first weekend I worked in movie theaters at my first job, which gives you the dating on me. That was the song that played over the credits. And when you're an usher cleaning the movie theaters, the only thing you hear over and over and over again is the credit song. So I heard Tonic You Wanted More repeatedly for about 2 weeks, and now it's just permanently embedded in the back of my head.
That's funny. I have, not from a soundtrack, but Michelle Branch, whatever that one song was that...
Would You Walk 1,000 Miles?
Yes. I was a server, and we played that at the restaurant over and over and over again. Yeah. All right, JD, what's your superpower?
I think for me, I default to problem solving in a very particular way. And I'm very much like a just get stuff done individual. And I think it doesn't just come in handy in the workplace. It comes in handy every day, because like around the house, I'm just a fix the problem person, because I come out of operations management and I can't turn it off. So I kind of operate like I'm managing a busy roller coaster at all times. So I am just there's a problem, fix it right now type of a person, as opposed to nothing. I rarely forget to fix something, to call someone, and I never lose anything. I lost my laptop charger recently. I don't know where, and I am still punishing myself for it. because I don't lose. I know where everything is right now. And how do I do that? Everything I own is sitting behind me. So make it very easy. But I pride myself in the fact that if you ask me where are my keys, I always know where are my keys. Where's my phone? I definitely know where it is. Where are all of the copies of my book? I can tell you right now. So I very much like to know.
Everybody, that's because it hasn't actually been published yet.
Exactly. I know where all of them are. And the addresses, they're all being mailed to right now. But I think it comes back to the idea, like systems, process oriented, like organization. That's my thing. Because I grew up from my first job having to deal with, I worked for the 4th busiest movie theater in the world, and then the busiest theme park on earth. And how do we get that job done? We're very organized, very process oriented, and we execute over and over and over and over again. And that just keeps going for me.
So this one is just, I don't know that we're going to get the depth of JD out of this next question, but what is your favorite cereal?
I think cereal is a sham.
So yes, we are going to get the full depth of JD.
I spend a lot of time in grocery stores, which means I go to the cereal aisle. And one of the things I make reference to is some grocery chains are so consistent location to location. Like it's like you're in a time warp. Like you don't know what city you're in because you're in the same store everywhere you go. I can find the cereal everywhere because it's always in the same place. But so many cereals I look at and just think, why? Why is that food? Is that food? So I'm a very standard classic cereal person. I eat cornflakes and Raisin Bran.
Okay. Which is cornflakes with raisins.
It's very unexciting in that regard. I think there's a difference in fiber content of the flakes, but if we've put them side by side. But so many cereals I look at and just think, like, what? It's usually the things that are on the lower shelves. The lower shelves are appealing to a certain clientele.
Children.
But just why?
Yes. Oh my God.
Nice.
I'm reading Sapiens right now. You guys may have read this in the past, but I am on the section where he talks about how wheat domesticated humans. Humans didn't domesticate wheat. And now I cannot look at any cereal or any sort of grain in the same way. So just think about that, JD. Your flakes have actually domesticated you.
This conversation is so good. I just got an email thanking me for the insights on the Red Thread podcast.
Oh, wow.
It's not even over yet. And I'm like, this is so good.
Oh my God. Okay, we have a few more questions and then we're going to wrap up. So in your book, JD, you describe managers as structurally trapped. And you gave us a couple of examples of what that feels like before. Like, this thing needs to happen, but you can't change any of these things. You're told to run your own business, but then you're not actually given any freedom to do any of those things. What do you think it takes to fix that?
The honest answer is it takes a recalibration of what this role is, what the job is, and what it's meant to be. I think it's difficult, especially if you're not a key decision maker within an organization. You're not someone who pulls the strings and owns the budget to say, I'm going to fix frontline managers. So I think it's incumbent upon everybody in the workplace, everyone who's trying to do something to support frontline employees, is to understand the experience of those managers, to value the experience of those managers, and then to do what we can to help those managers. And the simple version of it is, if you're an L&D professional, don't ask them for stuff. Don't make them do things. Don't assume that you can design a program that you're going to create like a teaching guide for, and then you're going to give all your frontline managers the guide and they're going to do that thing. That's getting deprioritized because something else happened in their life today. They might be very interested in doing it. They might highly value training for their frontline teams. They didn't know that they were going to have to arrest someone today because of whatever took place inside their operation. And if you want to talk about, what's the difference between the challenges of corporate managers and the challenges of frontline managers, you generally run into different sets of daily problems when it comes to managing different types of frontline operations, whether it's equipment downtimes, weather issues, or at one point I had to charge a 16-year-old with first-degree arson, which is an interesting conversation to have with the police and your corporate office. So what can we do to lighten the load a little bit, to try to help a little bit? Doesn't matter what audience I'm talking to, if I'm talking to people from a specific industry, if I'm talking to HR people, L&D people, and I ask the question, who is the most challenging stakeholder to get on your side when it comes to any type of frontline enablement strategy? The answer is always frontline managers. It is never the executive team. It is never compliance. It's never IT. It is always the frontline managers. The reason being, they got other stuff to do. They look at you as someone who is asking for something else from me. And I'm going to, again, prioritize the things that get me a phone call or relate to my particular bonus and compensation. So How can we look at, and then people ask, well, how do I get my frontline managers? And the answer I come back with is always help them. So maybe it's not a big business priority. It's not an initiative or project you're tagged into by a different stakeholder. But if you understand their frontline experience enough and what it's like to do their job, you can look at it and say, what small tweaks can I make? How can I show up in their life as that person who helped them with that thing that one time? And then when you show up the next time, you're that helpful person from corporate, as opposed to, oh, it's the L&D team asking for something. I'll end this answer with, again, my own personal experience. I remember the day, it's in the book, where I was managing the world's busiest roller coaster in the middle of the summer. And I looked at my workload graph that morning, and it took a giant dive in the late morning, early afternoon period because a bunch of my team members were scheduled to go to training. I didn't know what it was for. I just knew for 2 hours, I was going to lose a chunk of my staff, which meant I was going to lose vehicles, which meant your wait time was going to go up. And I couldn't fix that. So I remember watching the people leave the building and said out loud to myself, I bet when they come back, they're not going to be better at their job. This is before I was an L&D person. That was my relationship to corporate training. It was getting in my way. It was a disruption to me, and I didn't see the value. And they came back, and we went back to normal. And I still don't know what happened in that training program at all. Don't do that to managers, because if you get in their way and you disrupt their ability to run the business, that will echo in their relationship with you.
So that's one piece of advice. Don't get in their way. What else do you suggest? Are there some things that you've seen work particularly well?
Throw leadership development off a ledge somewhere.
Maybe from the top of the roller
coaster.
coaster.
It's time to stop. It's time to stop. Don't do it now because that's a safety incident. We don't want to do that. We have to hit a very big red button. If that happens, that's a whole thing. Leadership development, I think, struggles overall. But when you take it into the frontline space, with the day-to-day experience that folks have and the reality that most people, we want to live in a world, and there's an example in my book of a perfect frontline manager development experience where this individual goes into this restaurant chain and spends 6 months not managing, learning every job, building relationships with every employee, working shoulder to shoulder with the general manager until they are ready. Perfect. Most businesses can't do this. So we have to lean into the reality that we're mostly promoting people because the manager left and this is the best employee or the employee who raised their hand and takes the job. It's not someone who's gone through an emerging leader program, and it's not someone who has time to set aside to build the skills the right way or the way that your program is architected. So again, how do we step back and say, well, how do you scale meaningful support for people who are in different places, have different types of experience, and they want to do a good job? They just need help. I think one of the savviest things you can do is focus on connection. Help managers connect with other managers and then get out of their way. Because managers learn best from people who've been through it, understand it, and have very tactical, sometimes not SOP-specific ways to solve problems. There's a woman who contributed to my book who manages a hair salon. And she has another manager at another location. She said she calls them 10, 15 times a day. And sometimes it's just, are you seeing this? Are you dealing with this? It's just talking like that. Other times it's, my computers are down. Are your computers down? What are you doing with it? And it's troubleshooting and it's figuring out how to solve a problem. Because a lot of times people might say, well, call your regional manager for that. Go up the chain. Again, you don't want to tell your regional manager you don't know how to do your job. That has implications because of the implications. Always Sunny? So in this case, it's how can you just connect managers with one another? Because there were so many times when I was managing movie theaters and I had a problem because I was one of those people who just got promoted and figured it out. I didn't know who to call because I knew where the other locations were. I didn't know who was there. I wasn't going to cold call another location and be like, hi, you don't know me. I swear I work here. Help. And we have better tools nowadays to be able to try to connect people. But just creating the right group chat or the right monthly Zoom call with just the managers on it so they can have these conversations, start to make those connections, find their mentor, right? Find the person. I talk about a woman named Kathy in the book was that person for me. I just happened to work with her one summer. And just watching her changed me as a manager because I started to understand what the people side of this job was. I understood the operational side. She taught me the people side. She didn't know she was doing that. I never went to a class. I just happened to work with Kathy. So that can scale. Connection can scale. These side conversations can scale in a way that traditional leadership development doesn't. So that comes back to just reframing how we think about helping these folks and doing it through their lens and their reality not our own perspective about the solutions we want to provide or the perfect solutions. Because again, that gentleman in the restaurant, perfect leadership development program, perfectly crafted. Most of us don't work in that workplace.
Let's talk about AI for a second then. Where does it actually change what's possible for frontline workers?
In so many ways. I do think there's significant conversations to be had about automation. Let's take an example of something that shouldn't be as hard as it is, scheduling and trading shifts. Right, again, that stability, the ability to manage my life and my schedule, and the fact that especially if you don't work in a unionized environment, you don't have a lot of control over how your hours are doled out. The ability to use technology to automate a process that's often complicated and requires manager intervention, low-hanging fruit example of where tech can fit in and where automation can help you. But there's other examples. I think translation is powerful across the board. It is incredibly powerful when it comes to the frontline workforce and the ability for people to engage in their preferred language and not to just be trying to understand information, but actually consume, understand, and apply that information. When I was a custodial manager, back to that conversation, several of my team members were from Haiti. I could not have in-depth conversations with these individuals. I had to go through an intermediary to have anything beyond kind of the day-to-day conversation. I couldn't build the relationship I would like to have built. Now, with a different set of tools, I can engage in that conversation in a very different way, and it's just getting easier as that technology advances. So technology like translation, which we don't talk a lot about as an exciting AI story, is a meaningful AI story. And the one other one I'll give you is the digital assistant conversation. Every technology provider on the planet Earth and several other planets is adding some type of chatbot or assistant to their platform. And now, how many chatbots do you have at work? Today, while I was doing something, I was talking to ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude at the same time. It was a grand experience, but I had all three of them working on different parts of the same task for me. Hopefully that is not the reality of a lot of people, but so is technology transformation. But when you think about the digital assistant experience and you put it in the context of a corporate employee, okay, you can talk to Microsoft Teams and ask questions and get answers back, and that's great. But you're sitting in front of a computer. You used to be able to just search SharePoint for that information, or it was within reach. Might have still been difficult to find. It was within reach. You put a digital assistant in the pocket of a frontline employee, a person who, when they went through onboarding, didn't remember most of what they heard because they were really scared about doing this job, or they were wondering if their manager was going to like them or not like them, or what shoes do I have to wear? When's my schedule? Can I still take that week off that I had with my vacation with my family? So many other things are happening inside of that experience. And now, instead of waiting for my manager or relying on the person next to me, I have a place I can go and just ask and get an answer back. That's powerful. And now that AI can even take the information and change it in a way where it's not just maybe my preferred language, it might change the way the information is presented based on my reading level, based on how I ask questions. It starts to answer back in a way that's more easy for me to consume. Because frankly, a lot of SOPs are written for lawyers by lawyers, not necessarily for the people who are doing the job every day, a lot of whom just maybe aren't great readers. Maybe you're not a great reader and you just want to talk to the information. The information can talk back. It's things like that that change the day-to-day experience of work that we're now fully able to do. And it just kind of goes up from there.
Good answer.
I try. There's a whole chapter in here about AI on the front line. There was going to be one technology chapter, and I very quickly realized, no. So there are multiple technology chapters, one dedicated to AI on the front line, with a great use case from Joss Aretz talking about performance augmentation through AI in nursing. So how it fundamentally is changing the experience of nurses in Europe.
Interesting. So on that note, where can people find this magical book that will tell them about this and so much more?
So many great stories. I dare anybody who reads the book. Thank you to anyone who picks up the book and gives it a read. But I dare anyone who reads the book to get through the last story in the book and not get emotional. Because that's the interesting thing about the story that I try to tell. It's very tactical and practical, and there's a bunch of different examples and case studies where you can pick up ideas and apply them in different ways. But there's also a lot of humanity in the book and a lot of stories directly from frontline employees. We're talking about their experience and what's important to them. And the last story is particularly powerful. So I challenge everyone to take a look at that. But to grab the book, if you head to frontlineplaybook.com, all of the links and additional information are available there. And if you check out anything that I'm up to, project speaking activities and whatnot, if you go to jddillon.com, and let's connect on LinkedIn and continue the conversation. If there's anything I can do to help you help your frontline team members, let me know. Happy to help.
And does that book ship globally? Is it just US?
It does.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. How, I can't tell you. That's one of the things I've learned by writing books is that I have no idea how the book manages to get to certain places or who might be selling it at a given time. But I know it is being shipped internationally, yes.
Thank you.
Final question for you, JD. This is a question we ask every single guest. Why do you do the work that you do?
I just want to help.
Oh, that's a great answer.
Again, this reflective experience of writing a book. I had this with the first book and I had a different version of it with this book. And if you go backwards in time, why did I become a manager when I was 20 years old at the movie theater? I was not sitting there thinking, you know what I want to do? I'm going to build a career in the movies. That's not what was going through my head. It was my side job while I was in college. I became a manager because I liked helping the other people do what they were doing and be successful. I wasn't in it for the KPIs and the business outcomes. I wasn't making a ton of money. And then when I go on to other roles, and then why do I become an L&D professional? It's the same thing. I'm not like super into learning. I'm super into helping people, and learning is one of the things you can do. It sounds strange when someone who comes out of the space says, yeah, but it's really about helping people. And I know we're over time, but I'll wrap with this story. The book begins with me on the curb outside of my first job. And I talk about the fact that my career exists because I got the right trainer on the right day. There's an individual named Tommy who was my trainer at my first job. I was scared. I didn't like talking to people. I'd never made food or counted money before. And Tommy saw that, and Tommy helped me, and I wasn't scared anymore. And then I stayed on, and I was in that organization for 5.5 years, becoming the trainer and the manager and all of those different things, shaping training for other employees. And I write that story, and I was sitting there, I was in a Panera Bread writing that story. And I thought to myself, I should find him. He doesn't know he's in a book right now. Like, where is this guy? So I found him on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's amazingly good at finding people. I found him and I sent him a message. And this is why it's important. He didn't remember me. And that's the point. Because to him, I was one of many people he trained at that job when we were both in high school at the time. But to me, he changed something. Like, he opened a door for me and gave me an opportunity. It wasn't just a job. It was a job that changed my experience of life. It's where I met my first girlfriend at that job, right? It's where I interacted with people for the first time. It changed my experience and kind of led me down a particular path. He would never have known that unless I found him 20 plus years later. And I'm going to try to buy him lunch on the day the book comes out, because I'm going back home to go to the place where the book begins. And I got to take a photo with the book at the first job, right?
Yeah, you do.
So I'm going to send him a message again and say, hey, can I buy you lunch because of what you did for me 20 plus years ago?
That's a fantastic way to end. JD, thank you so much for being with us. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks, JD.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the chance to elevate the frontline conversation once again.
Thanks for listening. If this podcast got you thinking differently about how work happens, that's what we're here for. We dig into these topics every week in our research and in the Red Thread community. The Red Thread community is a place where people, leaders, and practitioners come together to compare notes, share what's working, and maybe challenge those things that aren't working so well. You can join for free at redthreadresearch.com/membership. Or if you or your organization are ready to go deeper, take a look at our professional and our enterprise memberships. For professional tier, for listeners, you can use the promotional code STORIES, STORIES, for a 10% discount. And if you're a tech provider trying to make sense of this space, our tech consortium is where smart vendors are coming together to learn from each other and from the market. You'll find everything at redthreadresearch.com. I'm Danny Johnson. Thanks for listening and for caring about making work better.
Okay, that's a wrap for this episode of Workplace Stories. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast so that you can be the first to know about future episodes. For exclusive access to our research, insights, and a vibrant network of human capital leaders, consider joining the Red Thread Research community. Visit redthreadresearch.com to learn more and to take your workplace to the next level.